At my father's funeral, my husband kept checking her watch. Not his watch. Not his phone. Her watch. The exact same model, same band, same distinctive scratch across the edge that I had seen on another woman's wrist just 2 weeks earlier. And by the time I understood what that meant, I had already buried one man I loved and was moments away from losing the other in a way that would tear something in me I didn't know could break. I'm glad you're here, because this is the kind of story that sits in your chest for years, heavy and restless, waiting for someone patient enough to hear it. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. All right, let me take you back to the beginning, to the cold gray Saturday in November, to the small Methodist church in Springfield, Ohio, where I stood beside my father's casket trying to remember how to breathe. My name is Emily. I was 34 that day. The flowers smelled too strong, the lights were too dim, and my mother's hand felt like a tiny frightened bird trembling inside mine. My father, Hank, had died 3 days earlier. Pancreatic cancer. For months from diagnosis to the hospice bed, we sat up behind the sofa. Watching him fade had been like watching a house collapse slowly, the structure's still there, but the foundation gone. And beside me, holding my other hand, was my husband, Jason. My partner, my supposed safe place, the man who had promised in front of God and everyone we loved that he would hold me up when life tried to knock me down. He looked appropriately devastated. Black suit, bloodshot eyes, a handkerchief tucked in his pocket. His thumb ran absent-mindedly along the back of my hand the way he always did when I was hurting. But his left wrist kept lighting up. The first time it happened, Pastor Miller had just said my dad's name. My mother made this soft, broken sound beside me. I tightened my grip on her hand, and when I turned my head just slightly toward Jason, I saw it happen. A message, a glow, a tiny violet heart on the screen before he flicked his wrist down sharply. I thought I imagined it. I honestly did. Grief blurs everything, softens edges, invents shadows where there aren't any. But then it buzzed again. And again. He tried to hide it, tilting his wrist, lowering his arm, pretending to brush something off his sleeve so he could glance at the screen. And that's when I finally saw the name. Madison Purple Heart. My stomach dropped so sharply I actually thought for a moment I might faint. Madison. A name I'd only heard once, 2 weeks earlier, when Jason had casually mentioned a new project manager on his team. We'd been at his company holiday mixer and a woman with glossy brown hair and a laugh like she'd practiced it approached him. She touched his arm too comfortably. She looked at his wrist too quickly. And that same purple-banded smartwatch glinted under the bar lights as she lifted her drink. He introduced us, and she smiled at me politely, but not like she respected me. More like she pitied me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I told myself I was being ridiculous, jealous in a way that didn't fit the trust we had built. Except now, at my father's funeral, her name was lighting up my husband's wrist. Over and over, like she couldn't let him go even for an hour. Even for this hour. The next vibration came right as they rolled my father's casket forward. My mother sobbed. The pastor placed a hand on her shoulder. And my husband, lowered his head as if overcome by emotion. But I saw it. That flash of purple. That swipe of his thumb against a screen that was not meant for my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything. My heart was pounding too loudly. People always talk about betrayal like it's a stab wound. But for me, standing there in my black dress with mascara drying on my cheeks, it felt more like gravity disappearing. Like the floor wasn't where it was supposed to be. I stared at him. Really stared. His jaw was tight, but not with grief. His eyes were wet, but not from loss. He swallowed hard, like someone trying to hide guilt instead of heartbreak. And that watch, that stupid glowing rectangle, kept pulsing like a heartbeat. My father's casket was at the front of the church now. My mother leaned into me, grief collapsing her from the inside out. And all I could think was, who texts a married man this much during a funeral? And why is he letting her? A part of me wanted to grab his wrist and hold it up for everyone to see. Another part of me wanted to run out of the church and never look back. But grief is slow. Grief is heavy. And the truth, the real truth, has a way of making you wait for it. I didn't know yet what I would discover. I didn't know how deep the rot went, or how long it had been creeping under the floorboards of my marriage. I didn't know that the watch wasn't the only thing he was hiding. But I could feel the crack open. A hairline fracture in the life I thought I had. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing was going to be the same after that day. What I didn't know was just how far the betrayal reached, or how much worse it would get before any of it made sense. And as the service ended, and the pallbearers moved forward, and Jason placed his hand on my back to guide me out, I felt it. A shift, a suspicion, a cold, whispering warning. Something was very, very wrong, and I hadn't even begun to uncover it. Before everything fell apart, before the funeral, the watch, the purple heart emoji lighting my husband's wrist, my life looked ordinary in the kind of way that makes you believe nothing catastrophic could ever reach you. It's strange to look back now and realize how normal everything felt. How safe, how steady, how convincingly I believed I was loved. I used to wake up before Jason most mornings. I'd pad downstairs in my socks, start the coffee maker, and open the blinds in the kitchen just enough to let in the soft gray Ohio light. Our townhouse wasn't fancy, 2 bedrooms, a tiny fenced patio space out back, beige carpeting we always meant to replace someday, but it was ours. We bought it 7 years earlier, a year after our wedding. Jason had carried me over the threshold, laughing as he bumped my head on the door frame. I remember pretending to be annoyed, but inside, I was glowing. He looked at me like I was the beginning of every good thing in his life. Back then, I believed we were building something beautiful. I believed a lot of things. Jason worked in sales, regional sales manager for a medical equipment company. He traveled often, but he always came home with airport chocolates or small souvenirs for me, a keychain from Denver, a mug from Portland, lip balm from some hotel in Phoenix. The little gestures felt like love, reassurance in miniature. I was a nurse at a community hospital in Columbus. The job was draining sometimes, but it grounded me. I saw people at their worst, their weakest, their most vulnerable. It kept my heart soft, even on days when the world felt too sharp. Jason liked telling people he was proud of me. He'd say it in this casual, performative tone at dinner parties. My wife saves lives. I just sell machines. And everyone would laugh, and I would blush, and it felt like we were a good team. During the week, our routines were predictable. Coffee together at the kitchen island. Separate drives to Wyke. Dinner at 7, usually me cooking unless he insisted on ordering something. Then a show on Netflix until one of us fell asleep. We had our small frictions, dishes in the sink, laundry piles, the thermostat he kept too cold, but they felt normal, manageable. The kind of friction 2 people accumulate when they share a life. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing world-ending. If you'd asked me 6 months before my father got sick whether Jason would ever betray me, I would have laughed. Not him. Not us. He used to leave me notes in the bathroom mirror made of dry shampoo. Good luck today. You're stronger than you think. Dinner tonight. Just us. He held my hand in public even when we weren't newlyweds anymore. He remembered the way I took my coffee before he remembered some of his passwords. He brought me soup when I had the flu and rubbed my back whenever anxiety made my chest feel tight. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. And I was his. Or so I thought. When my father got sick, Jason stepped up in all the ways I needed. Or at least, he seemed to. Dad's diagnosis arrived in July, and everything changed overnight. My parents lived an hour and a half away, so I started making the drive every weekend. At first, Jason came with me without hesitation. He helped mow the lawn. He fixed the loose hinge on the bathroom door. He sat with my father and talked cars, something they had bonded over from day one. Dad liked him, trusted him, told me once that I was lucky to have a man who would stand by me in the hard stuff. I believed him. The slow drip of reality, that poison, hadn't touched us yet. Even as Dad's health declined, Jason stayed mostly present, mostly attentive, mostly the man I knew. But grief is a magnifying glass. It makes small moments feel huge and huge moments feel unbearable. And during those months, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a barely perceptible change in temperature. I'd be at my parents' house helping Mom sort medications, and Jason would tell me he needed to stay behind that weekend because of reports, or travel planning, or end of quarter prep. It made sense, I guess. His job was demanding, but it was new, unexpected. At first, I accepted the explanations. People get busy. Life gets complicated. But when Dad entered hospice, Jason's distance grew more obvious. He came with me less often. Stayed downstairs scrolling his phone while I cried upstairs with my mother. Left early on Sunday mornings to get ahead of the week. One night, after I'd spent 10 hours at the hospice center watching my father try to hold onto consciousness long enough to tell me he loved me, I drove home emotionally gutted. The house was dark except for the glow of the TV. Jason was on the couch with a bowl of popcorn. He muted the show when he saw me, reached out, and said, "Hey, Em, how was today?" And I remember hating that question. Hating how normal it sounded. How detached. How do you think it was? I whispered. He blinked, caught off guard. Then he nodded, apologized, hugged me. But something in me tightened. A small knot. Barely noticeable yet. But real. 2 weeks before the funeral, that knot tightened again. Our hospital had its annual holiday fundraiser, a dressy event held at a downtown hotel ballroom. Jason agreed to come, and for one of the first times in months, I felt almost normal. He looked handsome in his navy suit. I wore a black velvet dress. We took pictures in the lobby, drank wine, laughed. That's when I first saw her. Madison. She arrived with a group from Jason's company. They were sponsors that year, so several employees attended. I remember noticing her immediately. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she moved like someone who expected every room to make space for her. Tall, glossy dark hair, perfect makeup, and on her wrist, a lavender-banded smartwatch with a scratch along the edge. Jason stiffened when she approached. Just a tiny shift in his posture, but enough. She smiled at him with this familiarity that felt practiced, rehearsed. "Oh, Jason," she said, touching his forearm lightly. "I've been looking all over for you." I'd never heard of her before that moment. He introduced us. She shook my hand. Her smile felt thin, brittle, like she was tolerating me, not meeting me. Then, as the lights dimmed for the start of the program, she touched his watch. His watch. The exact same model as hers. "Oh," she said softly, laughing. "Your screen cracked the same way mine did. Must be a sign." Jason chuckled awkwardly. Too awkwardly. I felt something cold move through my stomach. I asked him about it later, after the fundraiser, when we were driving home. "You and Madison have matching watches." He shrugged. "Company raffle giveaway. They handed them out to everyone at the retreat last month." "Everyone?" "Yeah. Why?" I didn't know what to say. My brain told me I was being paranoid. My gut whispered something else. I let it go. Oh, I tried to. By the time Dad passed, I'd mostly forgotten about that moment. Grief has a way of swallowing smaller worries. Jason was supportive the day Dad died. He held my hand, drove me to the house, helped call hospice, made sure Mom drank water, dealt with Dad's brothers who showed up in their usual hurricane of emotion. He did everything right. Everything a good husband should do. But grief makes you hyper-aware, not blind. And there were cracks. Small ones. Thin lines of truth beneath the surface. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, he'd smile at his phone. A soft, private smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Sometimes, he would angle the screen away when I passed by. Sometimes, he would step outside to take a work call, lowering his voice just slightly too much. And one night, just days before the funeral, I woke up at 2:13 a.m. to the glow of his watch. He wasn't wearing it. It was on the nightstand, but the screen lit up with a notification. I couldn't see the message, just the contact name. M. I told myself it could have been anyone. A coworker, a group chat, someone from his team. But deep in my chest, a voice I had been ignoring for too long whispered, "This isn't nothing. This isn't random. This is the beginning of something you're not ready to see." I should have asked him right then. I should have picked up the watch, marched to him, and demanded answers. But my father had died hours earlier. My mother was breaking apart. My sister was flying in the next morning. And all I wanted, truly, all I wanted, was one night where I didn't lose anything else. So I turned the watch face down, turned away from him, closed my eyes, and slept next to the man who would shatter me in the cruelest moment of my life. I didn't know then how deep the betrayal went. I didn't know what messages were hiding behind that glowing screen. I didn't know how long Madison had been in our lives without my permission. But the warning signs were there. Small, quiet, patient, waiting for the day they would no longer be ignorable. That day, as it turned out, was my father's funeral. And the moment he checked that watch for the 4th time during the eulogy, I felt the knot inside me tighten into something sharp. Grief makes time behave strangely. Some moments feel impossibly long, like a film reel slowed to half speed. Others disappear completely, like they were swallowed by fog. The days between my father's funeral and the moment everything broke open exist in that strange place, half memories, half shadows, all of it tinged with the kind of exhaustion that sits behind your ribs and refuses to leave. The funeral had ended. People hugged me, pressed warm hands around mine, whispered condolences I barely heard. Jason stayed close, his arm around my waist, the perfect grieving son-in-law in every visible way. But once, just once, I caught him looking over my shoulder toward the parking lot. Not toward my mother, not toward the casket, not toward the pastor, toward the street, like he was waiting for something or someone. He quickly looked away when he saw me watching, squeezing my shoulder gently as if to ground me. But something in his expression lingered, an alertness that didn't match grief. At the time, I was too numb to unpack it. Grief has a way of protecting you from truths you're not ready to face. But that night, after the reception at my parents' house, after the casseroles and card tables and murmured prayers, after my mother finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, that's when the unease started to bloom. Jason and I stayed in my childhood bedroom. The room felt smaller than I remembered, different somehow, maybe because grief makes every space feel too tight. Jason lay beside me, already asleep, his breathing deep and even. And for a few minutes, I let myself believe that everything I'd seen earlier, the watch, the name, the glances, was nothing more than my mind trying to find disaster in the middle of heartbreak. Because losing a parent makes everything feel unstable. Losing security makes you suspicious. Losing control makes you see ghosts. At least, that's what I told myself. But around midnight, his watch lit up on the nightstand again. I froze. The screen glowed softly in the dark, illuminating his side of the bed. He didn't react, didn't stir, didn't open his eyes, just exhaled long and deep, fully asleep. I leaned forward slowly, just enough to see the notification. I didn't pick it up. I didn't touch a thing. But I read it. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. M." My heart dropped so fast I actually felt dizzy. I stayed at the message, the soft violet heart pulsing at the corner of the screen. She knew about the funeral. She knew enough to know that today was important. She cared enough to send an apology, and she expected him to read it. I don't know how long I sat there. A minute. An hour. Time didn't exist right then. I remember pressing my fingers into my palms so hard my nails left crescents. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Not tonight. Not when my father had been gone barely 48 hours. But the questions kept coming, one after another, rapid, breathless. Why would a coworker apologize for missing a funeral? Why would she text at midnight? Why the heart? Why did he silence the notifications but not remove them? Why did he check the watch during the service? Why had he been so distant these past months? Why did this feel like the beginning of something I already knew the ending of? Jason rolled toward me in his sleep, his arm brushing my waist. The familiar warmth of him, normally comforting, felt suddenly foreign. Like touching a stranger. I lay back down, eyes open in the dark, replaying the last 6 months in my mind. Every missed weekend, every unexplained trip, every late night email, every shift in his energy. I kept trying to be reasonable. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe grief was making me paranoid. Maybe M was just a coworker being supportive. Maybe. But the Purple Heart glowed in my mind like a bruise. The next morning, Jason woke up cheerful. He kissed my shoulder, told me he'd slept amazingly, and asked if I wanted coffee. He went downstairs humming, a habit I once found endearing but now sounded wrong coming from someone who should have been grieving. I watched him leave the room and felt something cold settle into my stomach. That humming wasn't for me. It wasn't for my family. It wasn't for the man we had just buried. It was the sound of a man who had someone else, to retreat into emotionally. And I knew I couldn't see what I had seen. But I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. Not when Mom was still fragile and my sister, Claire, was flying in that afternoon. So, I swallowed the questions. I folded them into tight little corners of my mind and placed them on a shelf marked later. But later came sooner than I expected. Much sooner. That afternoon, I stepped outside to get some air. The backyard was small and familiar, with my father's old tool shed leaning slightly to one side, the maple tree losing the last of its autumn leaves. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, when I heard Jason through the kitchen window. His voice was low, too low. I moved closer, stopping just beneath the window frame. "I know," he said quietly. "I tried, but there was no way to get away today." A pause, soft, barely audible. "No," she didn't notice. "She's too distracted right now." My throat tightened. She, me, another pause. "I promise, once all of this is over, we'll talk. Just not yet." My breath hitched so sharply I had to cover my mouth. I wanted to burst through the door and demand answers. I wanted to shout. I wanted to collapse. But I didn't move. Something in me, some stubborn piece of me, needed more clarity before I lit the fuse. I stayed perfectly still until I heard the back door open. Jason stepped outside, phone tucked away, expression neutral. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, Em, you okay?" I nodded because words didn't feel safe in my mouth. "Just needed air," I whispered. He kissed my forehead. He smelled like coffee and cologne and something familiar. But now, everything about him felt unfamiliar. And for the first time in our marriage, I wondered who exactly I was married to. That night, after everyone settled into their rooms and the house quieted, I found myself awake again. I wasn't sure what had pulled me from sleep until I heard it. A vibration. His watch again. Jason's breathing remained steady beside me. I turned my head just slightly. A message illuminated the room. "I miss you. M." My heart cracked so sharply it felt physical. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake him. The watch pulsed again. "Tomorrow." My vision blurred. There it was. Clear. Undeniable. The moment I could no longer hide behind grief or denial or excuses. Something was happening. Something I couldn't explain away with exhaustion or stress or charity. Something that had been happening long before my father died. I didn't touch the watch. Didn't open the message. Didn't make a sound. I simply sat there, hands shaking, the cold truth rising like water around me. Jason stayed, half asleep. "You okay?" he mumbled. I swallowed hard. "Yeah," I whispered. "Just thinking." He slipped an arm around my waist and fell asleep again almost instantly. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the first hints of dawn press against the curtains, wondering how long my marriage had been built on a foundation I never knew was crumbling. By sunrise, I knew two things for certain. I wasn't imagining this. Something was deeply, dangerously wrong. And I was about to step into a truth that would devastate me even more than the sight of my father's casket lowering into the ground. Because losing a parent breaks your heart. But losing trust breaks your worldview. And I was about to lose both. The morning after I saw Madison's "I miss you" message, something inside me changed. Grief had softened me for weeks. Confusion had paralyzed me for days. But now there was something sharper beneath my ribs. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. A cold, steady clarity that told me, stop guessing. Find the truth. Everything else in my life was already falling apart. My father was gone. My mother was slipping into a fog I didn't know how to lift her from. My sister was still flying in, hours away from seeing Dad's empty chair for the first time. And then there was Jason, my husband, the man who held me the night my father died and checked another woman's messages during his funeral. I needed answers, not because I wanted to save us, but because I needed to know exactly what I was grieving. Was it just my father? Or was it my marriage too? Jason spent the morning running errands with my sister, who had arrived just after sunrise. He offered to take her out for coffee to give me a break, which felt generous at first. But as soon as the door closed, I remembered his words from the whispered phone call. She's too distracted right now. Meaning me. Meaning he used my grief as camouflage. My stomach turned. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway. Then I stood in the middle of my childhood bedroom and let the silence settle around me. I wasn't proud of what I did next. But pain doesn't ask permission before demanding the truth. His overnight bag sat in the corner. His watch charger sat on the dresser. And his phone, normally glued to him, was plugged into the wall beside my pillow. I stayed at it for a long time. I could have walked away. I could have told myself that if he was cheating, I'd find out eventually. I could have chosen ignorance. But betrayal is a strange hunger. It doesn't let you rest until you feed it answers. So I picked up his phone. The screen lit up, waiting for a passcode. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. Jason and I shared most passcodes, bank accounts, Netflix, the garage keypad. But his phone? We had never used each other's. Still, I tried the one I knew he used for almost everything. His birthday. Wrong. I tried our anniversary. Wrong. I tried the last 4 digits of his social. Wrong. He had changed it. That alone was damning. Jason never changed anything. I once joked he'd used the same password until the day he died. My hand tightened around the phone. Anger flickered for the first time. But then, from the corner of the screen, I saw something. Face recognition enabled. My stomach twisted. I looked toward the door. No movement. No footsteps. And then, disgust tightening in my chest, I lifted the phone and angled it toward my face. Nothing. The phone stayed locked. My reflection stayed back at me in the black screen. He had removed me. Carefully. Deliberately. Like I was a stranger trying to break in. I swallowed hard, shame burning my throat. I placed the phone back where I found it. Carefully, exactly positioned, just like he left it. But I wasn't done. Not even close. That evening, after hours of helping my mother make lists of people to call and looking through old photo albums we weren't ready to open, I stepped outside for air. The temperature had dropped sharply. I could see my breath in the porch light. The house creaked behind me, settling into its familiar night rhythm. And then I heard it. Jason's voice. Soft. Urgent. From the driveway, just beyond the porch. I froze. I know, he was saying. Today was impossible. Her mom was falling apart. I couldn't exactly leave. A pause. I moved closer. Slowly. Quiet as air. Yeah, tomorrow should work. I'll tell her I'm going into the office. Another pause. This one longer. Then, I miss you too. My breath caught so violently it made my vision blur. He said it softly, gently, like it meant something. Then, I wish things were different. He sounded tender, more tender than he'd been with me in months. I closed my eyes. This couldn't be real. Not after everything we'd been through. Not after all the nights I cried beside him while Dad was slipping away. But it was real. And it was getting worse. Jason hung up, and I slipped back inside before he could see me. I sat at the dining table pretending to flip through sympathy cards, my hands shaking. When he walked in a few minutes later, he kissed the top of my head. You okay? He asked. I nodded without looking up. I didn't trust my face. I didn't trust my voice. He didn't look at me long enough to notice. That night, after everyone went to bed, I turned on the lamp in Dad's office. I needed somewhere private to fall apart for a minute. But instead of crying, something else happened. Something unexpected. Something that changed everything. While pacing the small room, I knocked into the edge of Dad's desk drawer. It slid open slightly. Inside was a folder I didn't recognize. A simple label, Emily, for later. I frowned. My father wasn't cryptic. He labeled everything in plain language. I opened the folder. Inside were documents, financial papers, handwritten notes, receipts, hundreds of pages, and a letter addressed to me, sealed. I stayed at it, my whole body still. This wasn't what I expected to find. Not tonight. Not at all. My throat tightened as I slid my thumb under the flap and opened the envelope. Dad's handwriting, neat, blocky, familiar, filled the page. M. My vision blurred. He must have written this months ago, maybe even before he told us he was sick. And as I read, my breath hitched again and again. Not because of the grief, but because of the revelation. My father had left me something significant, something I had never imagined existed. Financial accounts, investments, a portfolio he had been quietly building for decades. Money, a lot of money, more than Jason and I had ever had. More than my father had ever admitted having. He explained the choices he made, the reasons he stayed quiet, the dreams he hoped I'd still chase. He wrote about resilience, independence, survival. He wrote about trusting my instincts. He wrote about not shrinking myself for someone else's comfort. He wrote, if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, M, choose the path that honors your worth, not the one that relies on someone else seeing it. I pressed the letter to my chest. My father had left me more than grief. He'd left me a lifeline, a way out of whatever was coming, a way to stand without Jason, a way to walk away if I had to, a way to rebuild, even if everything else crumbled. It was overwhelming, terrifying, liberating, but it wasn't the lowest point of the night. Not yet. That came when I opened the one document I almost ignored. A printed email. From my father to my mother, dated 4 months earlier, right after his diagnosis. The subject line made my blood run cold. About Jason, you need to tell Emily. My hands shook violently. Dad had known something. Something about Jason. Something so serious he wanted my mother to tell me.
A secret buried beneath my grief. A secret I wasn't ready for but needed more than anything. The email was short, barely a paragraph, but it changed everything. Marge, I overheard something at the shop today. Something about Jason and a woman at his office. I don't want to upset Em while everything else is happening, but she deserves to know before things get worse. Please talk to her. She's stronger than you think. I stared at the words, then stared again. He knew. My father knew. Before he died, before the funeral, before the watch and the messages and the lies. He knew. And he tried to protect me. Tried to warn me. My heart shattered in a new way. Not because of Jason, but because my father died knowing I was going to be hurt by the person I trusted most. And I hadn't seen it. I hadn't known. I folded the letter back into the envelope, my hands trembling. The truth was no longer a shadow. It was here, fully formed, unavoidable. Jason wasn't just drifting away. He wasn't just distracted. He wasn't just being supported by a coworker. He was involved. Emotionally, intimately, deliberately. And he was planning something. With her. With Madison. The lowest point wasn't the discovery. Not really. It was the realization that my father died believing I was walking straight into heartbreak, and powerless to stop it. I sat alone in that office, drowning in grief and betrayal and the weight of secrets I didn't ask for. And for the first time in my life, I whispered something I never thought I'd say. I think my marriage is over. I didn't sleep that night. Not 1 minute. Not after reading the message on Jason's watch. Not after hearing him whisper into the phone. Not after finding the letter my father left for me, or the email he sent my mother about Jason. Grief had hollowed me out for weeks, but betrayal filled that hollow space with something harder. Not hate. Not rage. Resolve. Quiet, deliberate, cold resolve. I wasn't going to confront Jason that night. I wasn't going to scream or throw things or demand explanations he wasn't ready to give. No. I was going to think, plan, protect myself. Because in that moment, standing in my father's small office at 3 a.m. with his letters spread out in front of me, I realized something I should have understood months earlier. Jason wasn't my safe place anymore. I had to be my own. I reread Dad's words, tracing each sentence with my finger. Choose the path that honors your worth. You're stronger than you think. It felt like he was speaking directly into the moment I was living. Into the fear. Into the heartbreak. Into the uncertainty. Jason's betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. Secretive. Cruel enough to happen while I was losing the most important man in my life. And my father had seen it coming. He had tried to warn me. He had left me the resources to rebuild after everything fell apart. I wasn't going to waste the last gift he gave me. So I started making decisions. Slow ones. Careful ones. The kind you make when your heart is shattered but your mind has never been clearer. Decision 1. Stop giving Jason the benefit of the doubt. This one hurt. Because even after everything, there was a small part of me, some leftover piece of the woman I'd been before the funeral, that wanted to believe he still loved me. That he was just confused. Overwhelmed. Misguided. But the truth was right there in front of me. I miss you. Tomorrow. I wish things were different. Those weren't messages to a coworker. They weren't innocent. They weren't accidental. He was in something. Deeply. Emotionally. And he had already chosen her in all the ways that mattered. So I made myself whisper the words into the quiet. He's not coming back. Not the real him. Not the man I married. Not the person he used to be. The Jason I knew was gone. Decision 2. Gather information before confronting him. I didn't have full clarity yet. I had clues, messages, phone calls, my father's warning, but I didn't know the extent of what Jason was doing. Was it emotional cheating? Physical? Were they planning something? Had he already made arrangements? Was he waiting for some specific moment to leave? The unknowns made me nauseous. But knowledge is power. My father taught me that from childhood. And if Jason was going to dismantle our marriage in the shadows, I wasn't going to walk blindly into that darkness with him. I needed facts. Proof. A plan. Not for revenge. Not yet. For survival. Decision 3. Pretend everything is normal until I know more. This might have been the hardest one. Because pretending meant sitting across from the man who betrayed me and acting like he hadn't shattered my world. Pretending meant smiling when he touched my shoulder. Pretending meant letting him hold my hand at church. Pretending meant listening to him talk about work like nothing was wrong. Pretending meant swallowing my pain until it calcified into something I could use. But I could do it. Grief teaches you endurance. Betrayal teaches you strategy. I had both now. Decision 4. Protect my mother. His iPad. He kept it in his backpack. Always charged. Always synced with his phone for work. And unlike the phone, he never changed the passcode. My heart pounded as I walked into the guest room where he'd left his bag earlier. My hands shook as I unzipped the pocket, slid out the tablet, and pressed the home button. The passcode screen appeared. I typed the code I knew he used for years, the last 4 digits of our wedding date. It unlocked. My knees nearly buckled with relief and terror. Because I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The first thing that loaded was his messages app. And Madison's thread was pinned. Top of the screen. Marked with a star. I opened it. My vision blurred. There they were. Hundreds of messages. Weeks of conversations. Maybe months. Scrolling felt like peeling off my own skin. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. I hate that she still thinks everything is normal. I wish we could just be together already. When her dad passes, things will get easier. She'll be distracted. We just have to wait. I stopped breathing. When her dad passes. He was waiting for my father to die. Waiting for my world to crack open wide enough for him to slip out without guilt. Or slip into her life without consequences. I kept reading. Tomorrow is the funeral. I'll text you when I can. Don't get upset if I'm slow. I wish I could be there with you instead. I miss you. I love you. I closed the tablet with shaking hands, but the messages stayed burned behind my eyelids. He loved her. Not me. Not anymore. Maybe not for a long time. I sank onto the bed, breathing hard, the reality crashing through me like a tidal wave. This wasn't emotional confusion. This wasn't a harmless flirtation. It was an affair. A real one. A planned one. One with whispers and timelines and a future he was preparing for. And I, his wife, was just the obstacle he needed to clear. The lowest moment came when I saw a message dated the night my father took a turn for the worse. I feel bad for her, but this is the opening we needed. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. He had used my grief. Used my father's death. Used my brokenness as leverage to free himself. And something inside me hardened into something I'd never felt before. Not vengeance. Not cruelty. Power. Quiet, deliberate, unshakable power. He didn't know I knew. He didn't know what my father had left me. He didn't know I had already shifted from heartbreak to strategy. He thought he held all the cards. He thought I'd fall apart when he finally told me. He thought he could dismantle my life without consequence. And he was wrong. So very, very wrong. Because now, I wasn't grieving a marriage. I was preparing for a confrontation. Not loud. Not explosive. Not chaotic. But surgical. Precise. And devastating. A confrontation where I would no longer be the vulnerable, grieving wife. I would be the woman my father raised. The one who knew her worth. The one who now had every piece of truth she needed. The one who would not break quietly. Jason came home at 6:42 p.m. I know the exact time because I watched the minutes crawl by on the stove clock while I sat at the kitchen table, Dad's letter folded in my lap, the knowledge of every betrayal burning like ice under my skin. I had already read his messages. Already seen the timelines he and Madison whispered about. Already felt the sharp, humiliating truth of how little my heartbreak mattered to him. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't grieving a maybe. I knew. And knowing changed the way I breathed. It changed the way I sat, spine straight, hands still, heart steady. It changed the way I looked at the door when I heard his key turn, not like a wife waiting for comfort, but like a woman waiting for the truth to walk into the room. He stepped inside carrying a brown grocery bag. A prop. A cover story. He set it on the counter, then smiled, too wide, too quick. Hey, Em. Sorry I took so long. Traffic was insane. Traffic? Sure. I didn't respond. He blinked, surprised. He moved closer, searching my face. You okay? I nodded once. Sit down. My voice sounded strange. Quiet. Controlled. Not mine, not his, something new, something balanced on the calm edge before a storm. He hesitated, then pulled out a chair across from me. Em, he said softly, you're scaring me a little. Good. Where were you? I asked. He forced a small laugh. I told you. The store. What store? He blinked again. Kroger. What did you buy? He reached into the bag. Just stuff for dinner. Chicken. Pasta. I figured maybe. What did you really buy, Jason? Silence. He swallowed. A flicker. Just a flicker. The first crack. I told you. Dinner. There's no receipt. He froze. His eyes darted to the bag, then back to me. And in that moment, I watched something fascinating happen. He realized I wasn't guessing. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't emotional. I knew. The realization hit his face like a physical blow. Emily, he whispered. What's going on? I didn't answer. I stood, walked to the counter, opened the bag, and turned it upside down. Empty. No food. No ingredients. Nothing. Jason's throat worked as he swallowed again. Emily, please. You weren't at the store, I said. You weren't anywhere near one. He stared at me. And then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose, his shoulders sinking with resignation. He wasn't going to offer another lie. He knew the lies had expired. What do you want me to say? He murmured. The truth. He shook his head. You're grieving. I didn't want to add to your stress. I didn't want to have this conversation now. Jason, I said sharply, I want the truth. He looked down at his hands. It's complicated. Start somewhere simple, I said. Start with Madison. His head snapped up. There it was. The flinch. The guilt. The unmistakable fear. You saw something, he whispered. I saw everything. I let the words sit in the air. He tried to speak. Stopped. Tried again. Emily. I never meant for you to find out like this. Funny, I said. You two seem to be planning very carefully when I would find out. He blanched. I pressed on. When her dad passes, things will get easier. Color drained from his face. We just have to wait. His mouth opened slightly. Shocked. Terrified. This is the opening we needed. He shut his eyes. When he opened them again, something inside him had turned hollow. You read the messages, he whispered. Yes. How? He asked, voice barely audible. I almost laughed. As if that mattered. Instead, I said, the iPad. He exhaled slowly. I forgot it was synced. You forgot a lot of things, I said. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Cold. Final. Emily, he said, leaning forward, I swear, I didn't want to hurt you. But you did. He closed his eyes again. I know. I waited. He didn't speak. So I asked the question that had been clawing at my ribs. How long? He hesitated too long. 6 months, he finally said. 6 months. 6 months of lying. 6 months of distance. 6 months of watching my father die while he whispered I love you to someone else. I felt something inside me twist, then snap into place. And all that time, I said, you were waiting for the right moment to leave. That's not. Don't lie to me again. He shut his mouth. I continued. You were planning to leave after the funeral. That's why you were so distracted. That's why you kept checking your watch. That's why you told her tomorrow and when things settle down. He stared at me with an expression I couldn't fully name. Fear. Regret? Resignation? Maybe all three. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he whispered. How was it supposed to happen? He rubbed a hand over his face. I thought I'd help you through everything with your dad, and then after some time passed, we'd talk about the marriage, and maybe separate quietly. Quietly, I repeated. He nodded. So she could move in. His jaw tightened. Emily. So you could start your new life. Please. So you could pretend you weren't cheating on your grieving wife. He flinched. Good. I leaned forward. Did you love her? He didn't answer. Which was its own answer. I nodded once. A small, sharp movement. I see. Emily, listen, he said in a low, rushed voice. Madison and I, what happened? It was unexpected. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Did it? Yes. And you were going to leave me. Silence. Just say it, I whispered. Say the words. He swallowed. Yes. The room spun for a moment. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just shifted. Like gravity had tilted slightly. I felt strangely steady. Like the fall had already happened, and now I was simply standing up again. Okay, I said quietly. Emily. No, I cut in. Listen to me now. He stopped talking. Good. I stood. Walked to the counter. Picked up the envelope containing my father's letter. I know everything, I said. I know what you and Madison planned. I know what you said about my father's illness. I know how long this has been going on. He lowered his eyes. But here's what you don't know, I continued. My father left me something. Something significant. Something you will never touch. His head jerked up. What? I'm not trapped. I'm not dependent on you. And I'm not going to beg you to stay. He looked stunned. I'm done, I said simply. The marriage is over. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to plead, maybe to bargain. But I held up my hand. No. We will not have a dramatic fight. We will not have a tearful discussion. You made your choices. I'm making mine. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're leaving me, he whispered. No, I said calmly. You already left me. I'm just acknowledging it. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. Emily, wait. I didn't. I grabbed my coat. My keys. My father's letters. And without another word, I walked past him. Past the lies. Past the betrayal. Past the man I thought I knew. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently. Because anger wasn't the point anymore. Clarity was. Strength was. Self-respect was. I got into my car, hands shaking, eyes burning, every part of me trembling, but not from fear. Not anymore. I drove to the end of the street, pulled over, and finally let out the breath I'd been holding for months. The marriage was over, but I wasn't. When I pulled away from my parents' street that night, I expected to feel shattered, or furious, or wild with panic. But what I felt was stillness. A hollow, echoing stillness that wasn't peaceful exactly, but wasn't chaos either. It was the kind of emptiness you get right after a storm passes, when the sky hasn't cleared but the wind has stopped howling. I drove aimlessly for a while. Past the park where my dad taught me to ride a bike. Past the diner where Jason and I had our first date. Past the hospital entrance where I'd spent the last 4 months walking in and out of hope. Everything familiar. Everything changed. Eventually, I pulled into a quiet church parking lot and just sat there with the engine off and the cold creeping in around me. I watched my breath fog the windshield. I read my father's letter again. "You're stronger than you think." It didn't feel true yet. Not in my bones. Not in the way I moved. But I held the words anyway, the way a child holds a flashlight in the dark, pointing it at shadows even as she doesn't quite believe the light will reach the corners. I stayed in that lot for almost an hour. I cried a little. Not the dramatic kind, just quiet tears that slid down my face without changing my breathing. I wasn't crying for Jason anymore. I was crying for the woman I had been before all this. The one who believed her husband's laughter meant safety. The one who believed distance meant stress, not betrayal. The one who believed love could not coexist with deceit. I grieved her. I let her go. When I finally wiped my face and started the engine, something inside me had shifted, not healed, but settled. Resolve was still there. Sadness too. But shame? That was fading. Betrayal has a way of making you feel stupid, blind, complicit in your own undoing. Tonight, though, I felt none of that. Because the truth was simple. Jason broke the marriage. I was just the one brave enough to name it. When I arrived back at the house, the lights were off except for the lamp in Dad's office. My mother must have fallen asleep in her room. My sister's door was closed. I stepped inside quietly, hung up my coat, and took a long breath before walking upstairs. My childhood bedroom felt different now. Smaller. Too warm. Like a place I'd outgrown without realizing it. Jason wasn't there. His bag was gone. His jacket too. He had left. Maybe to a hotel. Maybe to her. Maybe to wherever guilt and adrenaline take a man who's been caught. But the space he left behind didn't take the way I thought it would. It felt expected. Earned. Even necessary. I changed into pajamas and sat on the edge of the bed. An hour passed. Maybe 2. At some point, I heard my mother's door open. Soft steps. Then a knock. Her voice was small. Fragile. I opened the door. She took one look at my face, and even though I hadn't said a single word, she knew. She always knew. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. We sat on the bed, side by side, our shoulders touching. I didn't have to explain everything. She didn't ask for details. She just asked one question. "Are you leaving him?" I swallowed hard. "Yes." "Good," she whispered, her voice trembling with a sadness that wasn't pity, more like relief mixed with sorrow. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your father, he tried to warn me, but I didn't know when to tell you." "I wish he had," I said. She touched my hand gently. "He didn't want to break your heart while it was already breaking." I nodded. I understood. Even if it hurt. We sat together in silence for a while, listening to the furnace kick on and the house settle around us like an old companion. Then she squeezed my fingers. "You're not alone," she said. "We'll get through this." I leaned into her shoulder and let the words anchor me. Because for the first time in days, I believed them. The next morning, Jason texted. Not a call. Not a knock on the door. A text. "I'm sorry. I'll come by later today to talk." I stared at the message without emotion. Talk? There was nothing left to talk about. I typed one sentence. "I won't be here. We'll handle everything through email." I blocked him after sending it. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation. I wasn't strong enough yet for half-truths or manipulations disguised as apologies. I needed distance. And distance, I realized, is its own kind of power. Over the next few days, I contacted a lawyer recommended by one of my father's old friends. She listened to everything, my father's letter, the affair, the messages, the timeline. And then she looked at me with a calm, steady expression. "We can make this clean," she said. "And we can make sure you walk away protected." In the state where we lived, divorce didn't require drama or courtroom theatrics. Infidelity didn't entitle me to more, but it also didn't protect him from losing the life he thought he'd get away with. My father's inheritance was secure. Jason had no legal claim to it. And because I had documented proof of the affair, screenshots, timestamps, messages, she told me, "He'll want to settle quickly. Affairs look bad on paper, even in no-fault states. He won't want this dragged out." For the first time since this began, I felt something that almost resembled relief. I had leverage. I had protection. I had a plan. And finally, I had the space to breathe again. Jason emailed the next day. Long paragraphs full of remorse and explanations that didn't change anything. He said he didn't mean for it to go this far. He said he never wanted to hurt me. He said he felt trapped between two worlds. He said he needed space to figure out who he was. But buried in the middle of the message was the truth he couldn't soften. "I love her. But I care about you too. I just don't know how to balance everything." Balance. As if I was one item on a list he needed to reorganize. I stared at the email for a long time before replying. My message was short. "There is no balance. The marriage is over. My lawyer will contact you." I hit send. And for the first time since the funeral, since the nights of watching him check that watch, since the moment I read Madison's name glowing in violet on his wrist, I felt free. Not healed. Not happy. But free. And freedom, after betrayal, feels like oxygen. For the next week, I stayed with my mother. We cooked simple meals. We sorted through Dad's old things slowly, carefully, with tissues nearby. We laughed over stories from my childhood. We cried unexpectedly over little things, his handwriting on a sticky note, an old receipt, a photo from a vacation none of us remembered clearly. Healing didn't come in big bursts. It came in small moments. My mother resting her head on mine. My sister rubbing my back when I finally broke down. The smell of Dad's workshop lingering in his coat. And somewhere in those slow days, I realized something. Jason leaving didn't empty my life. It revealed who was actually in it. Who mattered. Who stayed. Who held me upright when everything else fell apart. When my father's lawyer finalized the transfer of the inheritance, I cried again. This time not from grief, but from gratitude. My father had saved quietly, invested quietly, sacrificed quietly. And in the end, he didn't just give me money. He gave me choices. Choices that weren't tied to Jason. Choices that weren't dependent on being loved by someone who couldn't be loyal. Choices my father earned through decades of discipline and humility. I promised myself I would use them wisely. I didn't rush anything. Didn't make big decisions right away. I just allowed myself to imagine a life where I didn't have to shrink to fit inside someone else's promises. A life built from truth, not illusion. A life my father would be proud of. By the time the divorce papers were drafted, something in me had steadied. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't shaking every time I saw a watch notification on someone else's wrist. I wasn't waiting for closure from Jason. I had given it to myself. The only time I cried about him again was when I realized I wasn't crying for him at all. I was crying for the woman who believed he would never lie. I whispered goodbye to her, too. Goodbye to the version of me who tolerated crumbs and called it a meal. Goodbye to the version of me who blamed herself for someone else's choices. Goodbye to the version of me who thought love was supposed to hurt sometimes. It isn't. It never was. When the papers were signed and the legal ties finally severed, I drove alone to the small cemetery where Dad was buried. The wind was soft. The sky was pale. The grass had grown in around the headstone. I knelt down and placed my hand on the cool stone. "I did it," I whispered. I walked away. The breeze shifted. A bird chirped somewhere behind me. And in that moment, I felt my father's strength settle into my bones, like he was reminding me that endings don't have to be violent to be powerful. Some are quiet. Some are steady. Some are simply right. I stood, brushed the leaves off my coat, and walked back to my car. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward something else. Something new. Something mine. Several months have passed now. It's strange how life rearranges itself after heartbreak, slowly at first, then suddenly, like a room being refurnished piece by piece until one day you look around and realize nothing is where it used to be. My life doesn't resemble the one I shared with Jason. Not in its rhythm. Not in its priorities. Not in its shape. And honestly, thank God for that. Because what I have now isn't loud or dramatic or dazzling. It's peaceful. And peace, I've learned, is the quiet luxury so many people overlook when they are chasing the wrong things. I wake up every day without waiting for someone to hurt me. I make decisions without shrinking myself to protect another person's ego. I sit at my father's old desk with a cup of tea and feel gratitude rather than grief. My mother is healing. My sister calls more often. I'm learning who I am without the weight of someone else's choices pressing against my chest. And as for Jason, we haven't spoken since the divorce was finalized. I hear things through friends sometimes, that he and Madison didn't last. That their spark faded once secrecy turned into responsibility. That he moved to another city and allegedly needed time to get his life together. I don't wish him harm. But I also don't wish him back. He was a chapter. An important one, yes. But a chapter that needed to end for the story to move forward. And I've stopped rereading it. Stopped asking what I did wrong. Stopped looking for reasons why he chose what he chose. I know now that his decisions had nothing to do with my worth. Sometimes the most freeing truth is also the simplest. Some people break things because they don't know how to hold anything gently. And that is not your fault. A few weeks ago, I visited Dad's grave again. I brought fresh flowers and a small wooden plaque I had made, the first piece for the scholarship foundation we're building in his name. It reads, "For those who build quietly, patiently, and with purpose." I placed it beside the headstone and stood there for a long time, breathing in the crisp morning air. Dad didn't live a flashy life. He didn't chase status or attention. He didn't measure wealth in vacations or fancy gifts or the approval of people who barely knew him. He measured it the way real people do. In loyalty. In integrity. In the quiet choices that accumulate over a lifetime. In the love he gave and the steadiness he carried. And he passed all of that down to me. Not just through money or letters, but through example. When Jason betrayed me, I kept thinking I had failed somehow. Failed to be lovable enough, beautiful enough, interesting enough, worth staying for. But my father's voice kept cutting through that noise. Your worth isn't something someone else gets to decide. He was right. He is still right. I'm living a life now that feels like my own, a life built from truth instead of illusion, from strength instead of fear, from lessons earned, not borrowed. Do I wish the betrayal never happened? Of course. But do I wish I had stayed once I saw the truth? Not for a single second. Here's what I learned from all of this, and it took me a long time to say it without my voice shaking. Leaving someone who betrayed you is not failure. It's self-respect. Healing after heartbreak is not weakness. It's rebirth. And choosing peace over chaos is not giving up. It's choosing yourself. I used to think loyalty meant holding on, even when it hurt. Now I know it means honoring the parts of yourself that deserve honesty. Jason taught me what betrayal feels like. My father taught me what strength feels like. And now? Now I get to choose what the rest of my story feels like. It feels lighter, clearer, hopeful. It feels like stepping into a life I was too afraid to imagine before everything fell apart. And if you're listening to this, and you're in that in-between place, half grieving, half rebuilding, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You are becoming. And one day, you'll look back at the version of yourself who survived all of this, and you'll feel something unexpected. Pride. Because walking away takes courage that people who never had to do it will never fully understand. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Through the grief, the discovery, the confrontation, the silence, the rebuilding. It's strange telling the world something so personal, but somehow it feels right, like the last step in letting it go. And before I end, here are the exact words my father wrote that I carry with me every day. Choose the path that honors your worth. I hope you choose that path too. No matter how hard. No matter who leaves. No matter what breaks on the way. Because what's waiting on the other side of that choice is freedom. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. The people who truly love you will never ask you to shrink, betray yourself, or wait for their loyalty. The ones who do are not your home. They are your lesson.